Before you hear a single word of my story, ask yourself, have you ever watched someone try to erase what matters to you just because they could? If you believe even the smallest stand against unfairness can echo farther than you think, you're in the right place. Stay with me. This is more than a story. This is the moment everything changes. The day began with frost on the grass and tension in the air, a dawn where every sound felt too sharp, every shadow held a story. My front door barely clicked shut before Beverly Moreland was in position, heels biting into the sidewalk, clipboard gleaming, gaze locked on my driveway as if she'd found a crime scene. The world outside was hushed, waiting for a verdict. She didn't see me at first. Her focus was fixed on the unmarked cruiser beside our porch, windshield fogged with last night's rain. My wife's badge lay tucked in the glove box. Nothing but memory and authority parked beneath the old maple. Sarah, finally home, finally resting, after holding an entire county together for 2 sleepless nights. Beverly's voice carried, crisp and sure. Daniel, I'm writing you up. 3rd infraction this quarter. Commercial vehicle, plain as day. She didn't ask. She declared. There was a certainty in her tone, as if she'd already won whatever battle she'd shown up to fight. But people like her always overlook one thing. Not every story is as simple as it seems from behind a badge or a list of rules. She saw a car. She saw a violation. She didn't see the years behind those walls or the promises made beneath that battered porch swing. Oakwood Crest liked things neat and tidy, everything in its place. But life, real life, never fits the boxes they give you. Maybe you know what that's like. Maybe you've had something that mattered, something small, a plant, a letter, a porch seat, targeted by someone who thought power was permission. If you've ever watched a stranger try to write your history in disappearing ink, stay with me. Because sometimes the smallest battles echo the longest. I set my coffee on the rail, feeling the roughness where my father's initials were carved into the wood. That bench wasn't just lumber and chain, it was every lesson he ever gave me, every quiet moment after the world went sideways. I promised him I'd keep this place in the family, protect the story he started. Today, that promise was on the line again. Want to see what happens when the right person finally stands up? Hit subscribe and join the journey, because the next chapter could be yours. Beverly advanced, pen poised, her shadow falling over the dew. She called out, not waiting for my answer. We can't make exceptions, Daniel. The board expects consistency, her favorite weapon. I almost smiled. They thought I'd just pay and disappear, like every neighbor before me. They had no idea who Sarah was, or what I was willing to do for the only home that ever felt like mine. I met her eyes, letting the quiet hang between us. Is that what this is about? Regulations for the sake of rules? My tone didn't waver. The game she played didn't scare me. It only made me more certain of what mattered. I glanced back at the porch seat, Sarah's car, the glow of our living room lamp. Every inch of this property had been earned. Inside, Sarah slept, utterly unaware that the morning had already turned into a chess match. To Beverly, she was a nuisance, another reason to fine, another chance to prove a point. She never wondered why a law enforcement car might be parked here, why exhaustion had finally won out over protocol. She didn't see a woman healing from the worst week of her career, or a husband keeping his word to a father gone too soon. She just saw a line she could draw through my peace. A chill ran up my arms as I faced her, not out of fear, but out of clarity. The past, the future, all of it seemed to tighten around this single moment. The porch seat creaked as if my father was reminding me, stand your ground. I did. People like her believe the paperwork will always protect them. But power is nothing without wisdom. And sometimes the strongest move is the one your opponent never saw coming. If you've ever held your breath, waiting for someone else to decide your fate, ask yourself, what would you risk to rewrite the ending? Where are you watching from? And what's the story you refuse to let go? She'd chosen the wrong family, and she didn't even know it. The rules she worshipped were about to bend. And by the time this was over, the only name anyone would remember in Oakwood Crest was the one she tried to erase. Beverly's footsteps retreated down the drive, her presence leaving the morning strangely hollow, like air after thunder. I watched her vanish behind the hedges, her clipboard tucked close, eyes scanning for the next infraction. The uneasy silence that followed seemed to stretch across the neighborhood, winding through manicured lawns and mailboxes painted in identical hues. Oakwood Crest prided itself on appearances, but beneath the surface, anxiety crept like roots beneath the pavement. A curtain twitched across the street. Mrs. Patel, always up before sunrise, lingered at her window, lips pressed into a thin line. "2 houses down, mister." Hoffman shuffled out with his newspaper, gaze flickering from Beverly's retreating figure to the patrol car still idling quietly on my driveway. He hesitated, as if weighing the cost of even a friendly wave. No one spoke, everyone noticed. That was how it went lately, the unspoken tension growing thicker with every notice left in a mailbox, every warning zip-tied to a doorknob. Inside, the house felt heavier than usual. I crossed the threshold, every step echoing the uncertainty she sowed. The aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the distant hum of Sarah's breathing from the bedroom. She slept on, shielded for now from the storm brewing outside. But the rest of the neighborhood wasn't so lucky. It wasn't just us. The past few months, the HOA's clampdown had grown relentless. Fines for trash bins out a minute too early. Letters over the shade of a garden gnome or the height of a fence. Sometimes it was a child's bike left near the curb. Once, a single Halloween decoration deemed unsightly. The enforcement never seemed random, though. It moved in patterns, always landing hardest on those who couldn't fight back, or simply wouldn't. Last week, the Garcias had their holiday lights torn down by sunrise. The twins next door stopped playing soccer outside. Their parents feared another warning for noise. Even the book club, usually immune to drama, found itself targeted for meeting too late on a Tuesday. The atmosphere felt brittle, neighbors pulling inward, eyes searching for escape or alliance. My phone buzzed, a group message from the block's informal chat. "Anyone else get tagged this morning?" One reply followed another. Parking, grass, noise, unapproved plants. Each complaint came with a sigh, some resignation, some flicker of outrage. Beneath the polite words, the message was clear. We were all being watched, all being measured. But what she didn't realize, what she never understood, was that every injustice left a mark, a small scar that refused to fade. People remembered the front porch seat, the car, the garden, the laughter that used to fill this street. Every rule she wielded chipped away at what made Oakwood Crest a community in the first place. I saw it in the way neighbors glanced at each other, the way conversations stopped when certain ears drew close. Trust, once lost, is hard to reclaim. Still, not everyone surrendered. A handful of us kept quietly pushing back, fixing what we could, standing up when it mattered. Sometimes that meant simply sharing a smile or helping a neighbor repaint a fence before another warning appeared. Sometimes it meant more, gathering after dark, speaking in whispers, sharing stories about the latest citation or rumor of Beverly's next campaign. I glanced at the swing, imagining my father watching, arms crossed, that half smile of his daring me to find a solution. This battle wasn't about paint colors or parking spaces. It was about dignity, about refusing to let fear turn neighbors into strangers. The breeze stirred, carrying the scent of cut grass and something sharper, the unmistakable tang of discontent. For the first time, I felt the neighborhood not as a collection of houses, but as a living thing, restless, waiting. Beverly believed she could rule through isolation, divide and conquer, but she'd forgotten one truth. Push people far enough, and even the quietest street learns to fight back. Somewhere nearby, a door slammed, a dog barked, and a child's laughter broke through, quick, defiant, impossible to suppress. I held on to that sound. If you've ever lived under rules that felt less like guidance and more like chains, you know how heavy each day becomes. But you also know, deep down, that every chain can be broken if enough hands pull together. In Oakwood Crest, the battle lines were being drawn, and I was starting to realize I wasn't standing alone. Afternoon sun glinted off the playground swings as I made my way to the little park at the center of Oakwood Crest. Laughter floated on the breeze, children darted between slides, parents chatted in low voices, and dogs tugged at leashes near the old oak tree. Here, for a few precious moments, the worries of warning letters and fines seemed far away. But as I crossed the walking path, I spotted Tom Hensley sitting alone on a bench, his shoulders drawn in tight, thumb flicking distractedly at his phone. Tom always dressed like he'd just stepped out of an open house. Crisp shirt, polished shoes, hair never out of place. Today, though, his tie hung crooked, and he watched the kids playing as if he'd forgotten what joy looked like. When he noticed me, his posture stiffened, the practiced smile flickering onto his lips. But the mask slipped for a heartbeat. His eyes darted toward the rec center, then back to the pavement, avoiding mine. I settled on the bench beside him, leaving a careful space. A little silence, broken only by the distant thud of a soccer ball, seemed to settle between us. I could feel the tension in his frame, the restlessness in the way he tapped the bench with his knuckles. "Long week?" I asked, voice casual, not wanting to spook him. Tom let out a laugh, thin, brittle. "That obvious, huh?" His gaze never met mine, instead lingering on a toddler's runaway hat rolling through the grass. He tried to say something else, stopped, then glanced at my driveway visible across the green. "I saw her out early," he murmured, lowering his voice. "She's making her rounds." There was more he wanted to say, but habit kept his words behind his teeth. His hand drifted to his briefcase, nervous gesture, then tightened until his knuckles paled. Tom was part of the board, but never part of Beverly's inner circle. If anything, he'd always seemed a little haunted by the role he played. I watched his struggle unfold in every movement. When a group of neighbors passed by, he sat a little straighter, forced a nod, the polite mask slipping back on. As soon as they were gone, his shoulders dropped again, his fingers tracing the stitching on his sleeve, lost in thought. "I hear a lot of things," he finally said, words clipped. "People think the board just wants to keep the neighborhood nice. But," he trailed off, jaw working as he searched for the right phrase. The playground fell quiet for a moment, as if the world paused to listen. Tom's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, frowned, then silenced it without answering. "Sometimes I wonder if we've gone too far," he admitted softly. "It used to be about helping folks. Now, sometimes it feels like we're just looking for reasons to say no." There was a vulnerability in his admission, an opening, brief but genuine. I studied him, recalling how he'd once helped my father repaint our fence in the rain, how he'd sent flowers when Sarah was promoted. Tom wasn't a villain. He was a man caught between loyalty and conscience, ambition and empathy. He seemed to sense my thoughts. "I wish it were simpler," he whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. A breeze stirred, carrying the scent of cut grass and something more bittersweet. The ache of regret. A shout from the field broke the spell. Tom stood abruptly, dusted imaginary lint from his pants, and cleared his throat. "Take care, Daniel." He offered a handshake, grip hesitant, and strode away with a briskness that looked practiced, almost desperate. As he disappeared down the path, I realized how deep the cracks ran. Not just in the community, but in the people trying to hold it together. Tom's struggle was written in the slump of his shoulders, the hesitance in his voice. He wanted to do the right thing. He just wasn't sure what that was anymore. The shadows lengthened across the park, and I watched as the afternoon drifted toward dusk. For the first time, I saw the board not as a faceless enemy, but as a collection of imperfect people, some complicit, some simply overwhelmed. Tom's internal war left me uneasy, but it also gave me hope. Change, real change, often starts with a single moment of doubt. If you've ever felt torn between what's easy and what's right, you know the cost of silence. Oakwood Crest was changing, and in that uncertain space, maybe, just maybe, there was room for something better to grow. The next morning, a damp chill clung to the air as I made my way down the winding sidewalk toward the row of mailbox clusters near the entrance to Oakwood Crest. Even this early, the world felt watched, every porch light flickering on, every distant garage door humming open. I carried a nervous energy with me, half expecting her to materialize from behind a hedge, clipboard at the ready. But, for now, only the steady drip of condensation from the leaves kept me company. A few neighbors lingered near the boxes, each one clutching a stack of envelopes as if they might bite. Mrs. Patel nodded a quiet greeting, her eyes darting to the official-looking envelope in my hands, the HOA's logo stamped in bold. I slid my key into the lock, the metal cold against my palm, and pulled the door open. More white and blue forms spilled out than I'd ever seen at once. Not just notices, warnings, citations, demands. Some for me, others for half the block, each one detailing fresh infractions. Improper vehicle, unapproved paint, grass over height limit, block disturbance. Mrs. Patel broke the silence with a soft sigh. How many this week? Her voice trembled on the edge of resignation. Gestured to the paper in her own hand, her fifth warning about her garden's unacceptable color palette. I tried to offer a sympathetic smile, but it landed flat. Tom appeared at the curb, still wearing the uncertainty from yesterday. He offered a subtle nod, but his eyes avoided mine. His pace was slow, as if he dreaded each step. He reached for his mailbox, pulled out a thin stack, and thumbed through it, face tightening with every new form. A teenager from 2 houses down stomped past, a scowl darkening his face. He carried a notice of his own, muttering under his breath about HOA stalking. I caught the word ridiculous as he disappeared around the corner, his mother hustling to catch up, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment or anger, maybe both. It wasn't just my imagination. The tempo had changed. The HOA's warnings no longer trickled in. They arrived in waves, saturating every street, every family, every routine. In the span of a week, Oakwood Crest had become a community on edge, each home bracing for the next attack. And always, somewhere just out of sight, she orchestrated it all with a zeal that bordered on obsession. Returning home, I paused at the porch set, running my fingers along the worn armrest. Each warning felt heavier than the last. It wasn't just about the car, or even the bench itself anymore. The pattern was clear: push until we break, until we give in, or give up. But I'd seen too much to surrender quietly. My father's voice echoed in my mind. You don't measure a person by what they endure, but by what they refuse to lose. I glanced up and saw a group of neighbors gathering at the end of the block, their heads bowed over a handful of crumpled notices. The old camaraderie of block parties and cookouts had shifted. Now we shared silent glances, exchanged stories and whispers, and offered what little support we could. There was a new fracture line running through Oakwood Crest, a boundary drawn not by fences, but by fear. Inside, Sarah was just waking. She shuffled into the kitchen, hair tangled, eyes still heavy with fatigue. She reached for the coffee pot, pausing when she noticed the stack of papers in my hand. Her fingers brushed mine, a silent promise passing between us. We'd face this together. The look in her eyes told me she was ready to fight, if I was. A knock at the door startled us both. I opened it to find Tom standing there, shifting from foot to foot, briefcase dangling awkwardly. His gaze flicked to the papers in my hand. "You got them too," he said, voice tight. I motioned for him to step inside, but Tom lingered just beyond the doorway, casting a wary glance down the block, as if half expecting the queen of citations to materialize at any moment. Only when the silence pressed in did he finally cross the threshold. He kept his voice low, every word weighed. "There's something you should know," he began, tension humming beneath the surface. "The board's convening tonight. This isn't just about another fine. Someone's determined to make an example out of you, and it won't stop at warnings." My pulse spiked, but I held Tom's gaze. "Let her push," I replied, calm but resolved. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." As Tom left, I watched him fade into the morning haze, his footsteps uncertain. The next phase of this battle was coming, faster and harder, but so was something else, a resolve inside me that felt unbreakable. Sometimes, the louder the warnings, the clearer the truth becomes, and the closer you get to the heart of the storm, the more you discover what you're really made of. Sarah's home office was a sanctuary of soft lamplight and quiet resolve, a space filled with the subtle tension of unspoken stories. Law enforcement commendations lined the far wall, but on the desk, framed between sticky notes and faded photographs, was the beating heart of her daily work: radio, laptop, and the black duty bag she never fully unpacked. I found her there after breakfast, coffee in hand, her face set in the determined lines I'd come to know whenever she sensed a storm on the horizon. She was scrolling through neighborhood alerts, eyes flicking across her phone. "They've ramped up patrols on our street. HOA vehicles been circling since 6. She didn't sound surprised, just tired. But there was something new beneath her calm, a thread of anger pulled taut. I set the warning letters on her desk, careful not to disturb her notes. "They're escalating," I said. "Tom's worried too. Beverly's pushing for board action tonight. Not just another fine, she wants a precedent." Sarah's jaw tightened. She knew how these games played out, in the block and on the job. As I leaned against the window, my mind drifted to the security cameras I'd installed after the last break-in. Two tiny devices, barely visible among the eaves and the hedge line, but powerful enough to catch every car that entered Oakwood Crest. The feeds ran quietly on a monitor in the corner, looping through hours of street activity. I almost ignored them. Routine checks had become muscle memory. But something in the rhythm of the morning nudged me closer. I scanned the footage. Beverly's SUV rolled past our driveway at precisely 5:58 a.m., a time stamped in white across the screen. But it wasn't just a drive-by. She'd stopped, got out, and paced the edge of our property for nearly 5 minutes, phone in hand, snapping photos. The camera caught the angle. Not the car, but the porch seat, the mailbox, even the flower beds Sarah planted last spring. She moved with purpose, lingering by our driveway just long enough to leave a slip of paper tucked under the windshield. Curiosity prickled at the back of my neck. I toggled to the next camera, this one aimed toward the resident entrance. At 6:07 a.m., she met with someone in a dark sedan, another board member, judging by the license. Plate frame. Their exchange was quick but tense. She passed him an envelope, he glanced around nervously, then drove off in the opposite direction. The pattern was no longer random. There was coordination, a strategy, and it ran deeper than garden gnomes and parking violations. Sarah watched over my shoulder, brow furrowed. "That's not enforcement, that's targeting," she murmured. "They're keeping tabs, on us and anyone who pushes back." She jotted notes in a battered spiral, details piling up faster than I could process. I paused the footage, heart pounding. "How many other houses?" I asked quietly. She scrolled through the alert log. "At least 6 this week, same pattern. Warnings, late-night patrols, photos taken, sometimes cars following neighbors as they drive out." She looked up at me, the weight of her badge pressing between us. "They're trying to scare people, Dan. This isn't just policy, it's intimidation." A fresh resolve settled over me. For the first time, the problem felt less like 1,000 tiny cuts and more like a coordinated assault, one that needed a coordinated answer. I thought of Tom, his nervous glances, his hesitation. I thought of every neighbor who'd stopped meeting my eyes. And I thought of the promise I'd made on that porch swing, the one my father built when I was still small enough to believe in heroes. This was the moment I realized I wasn't just fighting for my own peace. I was standing for everyone who called this place home. Sarah closed her laptop, the finality in her movement matching the set of her jaw. "Tonight, you go to the board meeting. You tell them exactly what you found, and if they don't listen..." She let the silence finish the sentence. As I left the office, sunlight danced through the window, illuminating the badge on Sarah's desk. I reached out, tracing its edge, a symbol of authority, but also of hope. If you've ever felt powerless in the face of someone else's rules, remember this. Knowledge is its own kind of armor, and sometimes the right set of eyes can see through even the thickest mask. A new path was opening, paved by every overlooked detail and quiet observation. The next move belonged to me. The bell over the door chimed as I stepped into Maple and Main, the neighborhood diner that had seen more whispered secrets and midnight confessions than any boardroom in town. The place buzzed with morning routines, servers weaving between booths, mugs clinking, the scent of strong coffee and fried potatoes hanging thick in the air. A few regulars looked up as I entered, their faces reflecting more than just curiosity. Word about the HOA's latest sweep was traveling faster than any news alert. Sliding into a booth by the window, I glanced across the street at the rows of tidy homes. For years, this diner had been the unofficial nerve center of Oakwood Crest. Deals made, birthdays celebrated, storms weathered over pie and pancakes. But now, even here, conversations carried a brittle edge. The hush after Beverly's name was spoken had a way of spreading through the room like a chill. I laid the stack of warning notices on the Formica tabletop, watching as the server raised an eyebrow. "Another busy week, huh?" she murmured, setting down my coffee without waiting for an answer. Her gaze lingered on the pile before drifting to the window, as if half expecting a black SUV to roll by. My phone buzzed, a message from Sarah. "Let me know if you need backup tonight. I don't trust her not to escalate." I smiled, the corner of my mouth twitching. Even when exhausted, Sarah's instincts were sharper than most. She understood the dance of intimidation. She'd seen it play out in bigger arenas than this, And she knew, better than anyone, what it meant to stand your ground with the odds stacked against you. Across the diner, Tom slipped in, scanning the room before sliding into the booth across from me. He looked more worn than yesterday, eyes shadowed, tie forgotten, his briefcase resting on the seat instead of the floor, as if he was ready to run at any moment. He didn't bother with small talk. "Beverly's got the board wound tight," he said, voice low. "She's framing you as a troublemaker. Says you're trying to undermine the community's standards." He looked down, fingers fidgeting with a napkin. "She's using your security footage against you. Claims it's a privacy risk." The words stung, not because of the accusation, but because I realized how far she was willing to go. She'd twist anything, even a simple attempt to protect my home, into evidence for her cause. I felt the weight of the room pressing in, the silent expectation that I'd either fold or fight. A couple at the next table shifted in their seats, pretending not to listen. But I saw the fear in their eyes, the worry that if I lost, they might be next. The block was watching, waiting for someone to draw a line. I thought of my father's swing, the wood worn smooth by years of weather and memory. I thought of Sarah, her badge resting on the dresser, her courage woven into every fiber of our family. I thought of every neighbor who'd stopped waving, every parent who hurried their kids inside when the patrol car circled twice instead of once. Suddenly, it all felt urgent, not just another round of paperwork or a tense meeting. This was about the soul of Oakwood Crest, the sense that home meant safety, that neighbors meant something more than signatures on a code of conduct. If I didn't stand up now, that would vanish for everyone. Tom's eyes finally met mine. "Are you really going to show the board what you found?" I nodded. "I am. Someone needs to break this cycle. It might as well start with me." He let out a shaky breath. "She won't take it lightly. She's not above calling in reinforcements if she thinks she's losing control." I sipped my coffee, letting the bitterness ground me. Then she should know. She's not the only one with backup. I sent a quick text to Sarah. "Tonight's the night. Be ready for anything." The decision crystallized, sharp and final. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was everyone's. If you've ever reached a moment when you knew turning back would haunt you longer than any loss, when you realized you'd rather stand alone than sit quietly, then you understand what this choice feels like. The moment your heart decides before your mind catches up. I pushed away from the table, feeling every eye in the diner follow me as I left. There was no going back now. For better or worse, the next move was mine. Evening descended over Oakwood Crest with a gray electric hush, every porch light flickering on in wary anticipation. The clubhouse at the heart of the neighborhood was alive with anxious murmurs, residents arriving in cautious clusters, glancing over their shoulders as if expecting Beverly to appear from the shadows and recite another rule. Inside, folding chairs lined the walls, a battered podium stood beneath flickering fluorescent lights, and the scent of stale coffee drifted over worn carpet. I arrived early, my heart pounding a rhythm that had nothing to do with caffeine. This place, usually reserved for birthday parties and holiday gatherings, felt colder tonight. Strained smiles flashed between neighbors, most of them clutching HOA notices as their tickets of entry. Tom lingered near the window, hands jammed in his pockets, gaze lost somewhere between the parking lot and his own shoes. He looked up as I approached, something different flickering in his eyes, a kind of restless urgency, like a man who'd finally decided which road he needed to take. I nodded, letting him know I was ready. The room filled, her absence making everyone even more tense. Whispers built like storm clouds, but I couldn't focus on any of it. My mind was fixed on Tom, the way he kept glancing at the door, the anxious tap of his foot, the slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted his glasses. When the last chair was filled, Tom finally motioned me outside, toward the empty patio that overlooked the playground. Out here, the air felt less judgmental, the silence more forgiving. He took a long breath, eyes on the horizon, and started talking, so quietly I almost missed it. "Dan, I have to tell you something," he said, voice shaking. "It's not just Beverly. There's a group on the board, 3 of them, plus her. They've been coordinating these citations, not for safety, not for order, but to target families who don't fall in line." He glanced back at the clubhouse window, shadows crossing his face. "They keep lists. They talk about who's problematic, who might challenge their votes, who's likely to complain to the county. It's all politics. The violations, the warnings. It's a campaign, not enforcement. His confession felt like a stone, dropping in my chest. I'd suspected, but hearing it spoken aloud, hearing the fear and guilt in Tom's words, made it real in a new way. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. He ran a shaking hand through his hair, struggling for composure. "Because it's gone too far. She wants to push you out, and she's pushing the rest of us to go along. She threatened to tank my real estate deals if I didn't vote her way. Some board members are scared. Some just want the perks. But it's not right. I can't do it anymore." He dug into his pocket and handed me a folded sheet of paper. "This is tonight's agenda, what she's planning to say, what votes she wants, who she wants to find next. She's trying to make you an example, Dan, but there are others who feel like I do. They just need someone to go first." His voice cracked on the last word, shame and hope tangled together. I squeezed his shoulder, silent gratitude passing between us. In that moment, Tom's struggle was laid bare, not just the conflict between right and wrong, but the fear of losing everything he'd worked for. "Whatever happens in there," he said, "I'm with you now. You're not alone." As we headed back inside, the buzz of conversation faded, replaced by a kind of expectant stillness. I looked at the agenda in my hand, then at Tom, standing a little straighter, his eyes finally meeting mine with something close to conviction. If you've ever seen someone wrestle with their conscience, you know how hard it is to choose the harder path. Tom had done it, and as I stepped toward the podium, I realized the board was about to meet a version of this block they'd never expected, one that wouldn't be silent, or afraid, or divided any longer. The tide was turning, and I wasn't the only one pushing back. The garage had always been my refuge, a place for unfinished projects, half-fixed lawnmowers, and the quiet comfort of old radio shows humming in the background. Tonight, though, the workbench was scattered not with tools, but with evidence. Printouts from the security cameras, Tom's agenda, lists of citations sent to families up and down Oakwood Crest. The air was tinged with sawdust, oil, and a kind of nervous anticipation I hadn't felt since my father first taught me how to fix a broken lock. I spread everything across the bench, piecing together a timeline from a mess of receipts and digital files. The pattern Tom described was right there in black and white. Warnings delivered minutes apart to problematic addresses. Photos snapped at odd hours. Emails between board members time-stamped just after Beverly's pre-dawn patrols. There was nothing random about it. Every move had been orchestrated. Every punishment calculated to divide and control. Sarah stepped in, still in her uniform pants but barefoot, hair loose around her shoulders. She looked over my shoulder, tracing the lines on a printout with one careful finger. "You're building a case," she said, not quite a question. Her tone was soft, but charged with pride. I nodded, sliding a USB drive across the workbench. "Everything's here, video, logs, Tom's testimony. If the board won't listen tonight, the county office will tomorrow." There was no bluff in my voice, only certainty. I'd built my career on knowing how to spot patterns, how to expose what others wanted to keep hidden. This time, the stakes were higher than a paycheck. It was about every neighbor who'd ever felt small in their own home. Sarah smiled, a tired, wry tilt to her lips. "Let them try to spin this. The truth has a way of cutting through outside." Headlights swept across the driveway. Another neighbor heading home, eyes darting toward our house before pulling into their garage. I wondered how many had felt that prickle of unease, the sense that every action might be monitored, every word weighed. The urge to retreat was strong, but so was the need to fight back. I called Tom, putting him on speaker. His voice was steadier than before. "I've told a few others," he admitted. "People are scared, but some are ready to speak up. They want to see what you do tonight." "Let's give them something to believe in," I replied. We talked through the plan. Tom would back my evidence during the meeting, others would quietly support us, and if she tried to shut us down, we'd take the whole mess outside HOA walls, straight to the county, the press, anyone who would listen. I assembled everything into a neat stack, slipping the USB drive into my pocket, feeling its weight as a promise. My heart beat faster, adrenaline mixing with a strange calm. The tools on the pegboard, wrenches, screwdrivers, an old tape measure, seemed to watch over me, silent witnesses to what was coming. For a moment, I caught my reflection in the dusty garage window, older than I remembered, but steadier too. Sarah squeezed my hand. "You're not alone in this. No matter what happens, I'm right behind you." Her words were more than comfort. They were a shield. The clock inched toward meeting time. Outside, dusk deepened, shadows lengthened, and the whole neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. I shut the garage door behind me, the clang echoing like a closing argument. Every piece was in place. The evidence, the witnesses, the plan. What had started as a battle over a parking ticket had become something much bigger. A stand for the right to belong, to be heard, to claim a piece of peace in the only place that truly felt like home. If you've ever faced a moment where backing down would haunt you more than any defeat, you know what this feels like. The quiet before the storm. The certainty that the next move, for better or worse, will change everything. With one last look at the porch seat glinting in the dusk, I turned toward the street, evidence in hand, and walked toward the light of the clubhouse, ready to show Beverly and her board what real authority looked like. The sun slipped lower behind the rooftops, throwing long shadows across the cracked sidewalks of Oakwood Crest. I walked beneath the maple trees, evidence files tucked under my arm, each footstep measured, heart drumming with a cocktail of anxiety and purpose. Tonight's meeting would be more than a formality. It would be the moment when truth stepped into the light. The air was electric with possibility. Change felt close enough to touch, yet fragile as spun glass. Neighbors moved quietly along the street, some tending gardens, others sweeping porches or pausing with hands on hips, watching my progress. Our eyes met, and something silent passed between us. A nod, a glance, the smallest shift in posture. Not so long ago, everyone would have hurried inside, unwilling to draw her attention. But tonight, the chill of fear was thinning. Even the youngest residents sensed the current shifting. Halfway down the block, the Garcia twins' father stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag, a nervous smile ghosting across his face. "You heading to the meeting?" he asked, voice pitched low but resolute. I nodded, feeling the gravity of every story that had brought us to this point. Every fine, every warning, every look of shame or frustration. "I am," I replied. "We're not letting this go any further." A handful of others joined me, wordlessly falling into step as we moved toward the clubhouse. Mrs. Patel, her lips pressed together but her chin high. Mr. Hoffman, whose stoic silence now read as quiet support. A teenager with earbuds hanging from his collar, eyes narrowed in stubborn hope. Each face reminded me that this fight had never really been mine alone. Beverly's campaign had created a village of survivors, people tired of watching their sense of home get ground down by threats and paperwork. We crossed the street, the bench in my peripheral vision catching the gold of the last sunlight. For a second, I heard my father's laughter, that deep, steady confidence that always made the world seem less daunting. The memory braced me. The porch seat was more than a symbol. It was a lifeline. At the corner, Tom waited, hands jammed deep in his coat pockets. His face looked drawn, the lines of stress softened only by a flicker of resolve. "It's time," he said simply, and together we pressed on, our little procession growing as others emerged from their homes, drawn by rumor and hope. As we neared the clubhouse, a hush fell over the group. The building's windows glowed, silhouettes moving inside, the anticipation almost palpable. I checked my phone. Sarah's last message glowed on the screen. "We're with you." "Don't back down." Her words pulsed like a heartbeat, steadying my resolve. Outside the entrance, I paused, letting the gathering neighbors settle around me. Their presence felt like armor, quiet, imperfect, but stronger for having been forged in shared struggle. "Ready?" Tom murmured. I took a deep breath, feeling every scar, every doubt, every quiet hope that had brought us here. "Let's do this." We stepped through the doors together. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. The board members clustered near the podium, her standing tall at the front, eyes hard as glass. She scanned the crowd, her gaze faltering for just a split second at the sight of so many faces united in silence. The crowd filled every seat, some standing at the back, hands gripping envelopes, phones ready. My heart pounded as I scanned the room, spotting Sarah near the exit, her posture calm but eyes burning with support. All our preparation, The evidence, the testimony, the careful alliances had led to this moment. I could sense the board's confidence wobble, as if they had expected another night of meek compliance. Tom caught my eye, offering a nod that spoke of trust rebuilt, of conscience finally unburdened. The neighborhood had changed, and so had I. No matter what happened next, the truth was about to break free. If you've ever felt the tension of a moment that could tip either way, where fear and hope dance so close you can't tell which is stronger, you know what this felt like. I squared my shoulders, stepped into the warm circle of light at the center of the clubhouse, and faced Beverly and her board. The time for silence was over. The next words would echo long after tonight's meeting ended. The clubhouse was brighter than I remembered, every overhead light burning, as if the truth could only live in full view. Folding chairs lined the walls, occupied by neighbors who had stopped being just faces. They were witnesses now, their silence a kind of quiet solidarity. I stood near the front, hands gripping the folder of evidence I'd spent sleepless nights assembling, heart pounding with a rhythm that felt both ancient and new. She surveyed the crowd with the composure of a seasoned performer, her lips curved in a practiced smile, clipboard clutched so tightly her knuckles blanched. The rest of the board took their places behind her, forming a line of authority designed to discourage dissent. The tension was palpable, every cough or shifting foot sounding impossibly loud. Sarah, stationed by the side door, caught my eye. Her presence was steadying, an anchor in the tide. Tom stood by the refreshment table, hands folded, the faintest hint of a nod assuring me he was ready to speak if I needed him. All around us, a current of expectation hummed. Phones poised to record, whispers darting like fireflies, neighbors bracing for whatever would come next. Beverly called the meeting to order, her voice crisp, echoing off the tile floor. She launched into an agenda dense with bylaws and citations, her tone designed to lull and control, but the room's attention drifted. Everyone was waiting for the turn, the moment something real would break through the pattern, when my name surfaced. Daniel Riley, cited for unauthorized vehicle, repeated non-compliance. I rose, pulse quickening, but gaze unwavering. I stepped into the light, the folder heavy in my grasp. Before you continue, I said, my words clear and measured, I'd like to address the board and the community. All eyes turned to me. The silence grew, not awkward but charged, as if everyone recognized the weight of what was about to unfold. I held up the folder, the pages inside trembling only slightly in my hands. In recent weeks, enforcement has shifted from fairness to targeting, I began. These warnings, these citations, they don't reflect random mistakes. They're coordinated. I have security footage, logs, and witness statements showing a pattern. Families singled out for speaking up, for asking questions, for not falling in line. A ripple of uncertainty flickered through the board. Beverly's mask of confidence tightened. Mr. Riley, this isn't the time, she started, but Tom's voice cut in, calm but resolute. I've seen it too, he said. His admission seemed to echo, cracking the facade. It's not enforcement. It's intimidation. The board has been pressured to follow a plan, to punish anyone who doesn't go along. Whispers swept the room, heads turned, shoulders straightened. The power dynamic was shifting in real time, no longer invisible. I distributed copies of the evidence, time-stamped videos, copies of warnings, Tom's written statement, letting the facts speak for themselves. One by one, neighbors leaned forward, anger giving way to determination. She tried to retake control, her voice tightening. The board will review, but another resident stood up, shaking a notice of his own. How many more times will we be threatened for nothing? The words hung there, heavier than any gavel. Phones filmed, evidence piled up, the truth impossible to refold into silence. Sarah's presence was a steady current behind me. Her training, her patience, her unwavering sense of justice all seemed to fill the space. The momentum was unstoppable now. I finished with what mattered most. This isn't about just one car or one rule. It's about the spirit of Oakwood Crest. If we let intimidation win here, we lose more than a parking space. We lose the trust and safety that make this a home worth fighting for. A long, loaded pause stretched across the room. The board members shifted, caught between loyalty and exposure. Beverly's composure frayed, her certainty leaking away as the crowd refused to look away. Every preparation, every sleepless night, Every conversation and risk had led here. And in that moment, I felt the weight lift, not just for me, but for everyone who'd ever been silenced by the threat of authority. If you've ever stood on the edge of change, you know the feeling, the hush before the storm, the moment you realize you're not standing alone. The final decision was no longer in the hands of a few. The block had found its voice, and the board could feel it. A hush gripped the clubhouse as the last words echoed from the podium. The air was thick with tension, every person inside the room balanced on a wire between fear and hope. Even the overhead lights seemed to flicker with anticipation, illuminating the faces of neighbors who had finally shed their old passivity for something new and bold. Beverly's posture had stiffened, her usual composure cracking under the weight of evidence and testimony. She gripped the podium, knuckles bone white as she scanned the crowd, her eyes darting from one angry face to another, searching for an ally and finding only resistance. For years, her word had been law in Oakwood Crest. Tonight, the script was flipped. I stood with Tom beside me, the folder of evidence resting in my hands. Sarah just a few feet away, quiet but unmistakably present. Phones hovered in the air, recording every word, every subtle shift. The usual hierarchy, board on the dais, residents silent in the chairs, had dissolved. Instead, the room hummed with the shared electricity of 100 people, united for the first time by something more powerful than rules, the hunger for justice. She tried to regain the narrative. "Order! Please, let's maintain order. This isn't a trial." Her voice was sharp but brittle, cracking at the edges. Several board members exchanged uneasy glances. One quietly slid his chair back, the first crack in the dam. Tom cleared his throat, voice carrying steady despite the tension. "We are the board, Beverly. Our job is to serve the community, not target it. I move to suspend all fines pending independent review and to open an investigation into the pattern of selective enforcement." He looked at the other members, inviting them to show their hands. A buzz rippled through the crowd. Residents who had never spoken up before began to add their voices. Stories of warnings for kids' chalk drawings, late-night patrols, threats over harmless decorations. Each story strengthened the collective will, the courage building with every shared memory. For the first time in years, people were truly listening to each other, finding solidarity in what they'd all endured. Her mask faltered. She tried to rally her supporters, but the ground had shifted. The more she insisted on her authority, the less anyone seemed to hear her. Sarah stepped forward, her presence radiating calm strength. "Intimidation and fear have no place here," she said, her tone even, unmistakable. "I'm county sheriff. I know the difference between enforcement and harassment. This ends tonight." Applause broke out, tentative at first, then swelling as more voices joined in. Tears glistened in the corners of Mrs. Patel's eyes. The Garcia's twins cheered from the back, their father clutching his wife's hand as if afraid the moment might slip away. Tom gathered his courage and addressed the board directly. "If we're going to repair what's been broken, it starts now. We need accountability, new elections, and full transparency tonight." The rest of the board, suddenly exposed, had little choice but to acquiesce. One by one, they signaled their support, some sheepishly, others with a kind of quiet relief. Beverly's shoulders slumped. The clipboard that had ruled so many mornings now seemed nothing more than cheap plastic. In that instant, she wasn't the gatekeeper of Oakwood Crest. She was simply another neighbor, forced to reckon with the truth. I let the moment hang, the crowd's energy buzzing in my bones. If you've ever wanted to see a bully back down by the very people they tried to intimidate, this is your story, I said, letting the words settle, real and raw. As the meeting adjourned, laughter and applause mingled with tears, neighbors reaching for each other, not in fear, but in celebration. The long shadow she had cast was receding, replaced by a dawning sense of unity and hope. Outside, the night felt warmer than it had in months. Streetlights glowed softly over the gathering crowd, voices raised in new camaraderie. For the first time in a long time, Oakwood Crest felt like home again. Morning in Oakwood Crest felt transformed. Sunlight streamed through the trees, painting gold across every doorstep. For the first time in months, the neighborhood was alive with an energy that had nothing to do with warnings or whispered threats. Doors stood open, laughter carried from porch to porch. and a gentle sense of possibility hung in the air. Fragile, maybe, but real. I sat on the porch swing, coffee warming my palms, watching as Sarah talked with Mrs. Patel at the curb. Their voices rose and fell with easy humor. Two women who had only ever exchanged wary nods, now planning the next community get-together. The Garcias twins zipped by on their bikes, trailing giggles behind them, no longer glancing over their shoulders for the HOA patrol. Across the street, Tom tended his roses, each bloom nodding under the weight of last night's rain, his posture lighter than I'd ever seen. It was hard to believe that only days before, dread had ruled every morning. The board's decision to suspend all fines, open the books, and hold new elections had done more than end Beverly's reign. It had pulled the neighborhood into the sunlight, inviting old friends and near strangers alike to step forward, share stories, and start the long work of rebuilding trust. She herself hadn't been seen since the meeting ended. Her name faded to a footnote, replaced by the stories neighbors now shared about kindness, perseverance, and a refusal to let one person's fear dictate the lives of many. The clipboard she once wielded with such authority was nowhere to be found, just an artifact, stripped of its power. Sarah joined me on the bench, her hand slipping into mine. She leaned her head on my shoulder, a quiet, strength in her silence. "We did it," she said simply, eyes soft with relief. "Not just for us, for everyone." I thought of my father, the weight of his promise echoing in every creak of the porch seat. Keeping the house safe wasn't just about defending four walls. It was about protecting the people inside, the legacy of compassion and courage he left behind. In standing up, we'd honored his memory, not just by winning, but by helping neighbors find their voices. Tom crossed the yard, pausing by the steps. "Feels different today," he said, looking out across the block. "Feels like home again." There was no hint of shame now, only quiet pride. I nodded, understanding the cost and the reward of choosing the harder path. I sipped my coffee, letting the peace settle around us. The battle was over, but its lesson lingered. If you've ever wondered whether standing up to the impossible is worth it, whether the struggle to reclaim your home, your peace, your dignity can ever make a difference, remember Oakwood Crest. Sometimes it only takes one voice to break the silence, one act of courage to remind a whole community what it means to belong. So, here's what I want to know. What's the story you wish someone would finally tell? And if you're ready for more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now. Share your own experience in the comments, and let me know how you'd fight back where you live. Because in the end, it's not about the rules. It's about the people brave enough to change them.